Hello, welcome to a PhD Opportunities at Google in Europe Hangouts, for want of a better word. This is being broadcast live and will also be available from the Google student blog. And I'd like to introduce my colleagues and myself. My name is Peter Bickman. I'm an engineering manager in Zurich office, where I manage teams looking after our search backend. And now over to Mary in Dublin.
Hi, I'm Mary. I'm working in the Dublin office as a computational linguist, and I'm part of a team that builds multilingual text classifiers. So if you have a piece of text in one of about 15 or so languages and you want to know what's the major topic of that text or what's it all about, well, we detect that kind of thing automatically.
And Dario in London.
Hi, I'm Dario. I am a software engineer in the London office. I am part of our site reliability engineering teams, which are the teams that manages production services at Google, and at the same time they make sure that they perform fast, reliably, and at a large scale. In particular, my team works on some ads backend services.
And Ulf in Munich.
Hi, I'm Ulf Adams from Munich. I am a software engineer, and I work on Google's build system. In particular, I'm the tech lead of the tool that we use to run the build system. What's interesting about Google's build system is that we have a couple million lines of code, literally, in the depot. So we have to be extra careful to make it fast and reliable. Also, I mean, we're Google. We run all of our builds in the data center. So part of what I'm doing is to figure out how to best distribute jobs across the data center and to make it work well.
Right. So today we're going to talk about why someone with a computing science PhD or a PhD in a related topic will be interested in a career at Google. And to get us started, we're just going to each tell you a little bit about our background and how we ended up at Google. So I was originally a mathematician. I worked in industry for a few years in software and then went back to university to do my PhD, where I focused on large-scale distributed systems and managing objects. After that, I was a postdoc for a couple of years, and then I spent nearly 15 years as an academic before moving to Google 4 years ago. While an academic, I ran a graduate school looking after a large number of PhD students across mathematics, computing science, statistics, and psychology. And I found that, in fact, both my PhD and that experience of supervising PhDs and running a graduate school are incredibly relevant to my job here, because the engineering teams basically feel like small research groups. They are very, very bright engineers working to build things, practically oriented, but still at that very high level. Mary, tell us a little more about your background.
So I did an undergraduate degree in applied computational linguistics, which basically mixed computer science, linguistics, and languages, and kind of brought all those together into building systems that would compute in some way over natural language. So from that, then I went on to do a PhD in computing, and I focused on natural language parsing and machine translation. And I worked for a couple of years as a postdoc researcher and part-time lecturer, and really enjoyed that experience. I was at Dublin City University before I joined Google. And all of this background was actually really relevant when I moved to Google, because I still work in natural language processing systems. So all of the sort of fundamental ideas from linguistics and computer science are all just as relevant now as they were when I was in academia.
Dario?
So during my PhD, I was working in privacy data management with a particular focus on geosocial networks. This is not exactly what I'm doing now as my main project, but I joined the privacy team here at Google, and in my 20% I collaborate with them, and I'm kind of a consultant and also collaborate with them to check that our product handle data and the user data in a safe way for users. In general, this doesn't mean that the PhD experience is useful to me at all. It means that actually, during my PhD, I improved a lot my problem-solving skills. I used to say to my friends that make me the question about how your PhD is useful, that probably I wouldn't have been a good fit for Google by the time I was a graduate student. This is not always the case. Clearly, there are also some talented people that come from undergraduate with undergraduate degrees. But it helped me personally in the PhD in have a deeper understanding of computer science topics like algorithms, distributed systems. I was a teaching assistant for the distributed system course, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, in general, also one of the main things that I bring from a PhD is the research methodologies that I actually applies in almost that applies to almost every problem you face here. In general, you have a more systematic approach. So especially the fact that you need to provide data with your solution, when you propose some solution in order to support your solution, is very important here at Google, and it's part of the culture. And I think this is something that comes straight from the research methodology in the academia culture.
And Ulf, can you tell us a little more of your background?
So I started studying computer science in Germany, and then I went to Stanford in California in the USA for my master's degree. When I came back, I decided to go for a PhD in the intersection of computer graphics and hardware. To follow what my colleagues have said before, the main thing I learned in my PhD that I'm still applying today, I guess, is my writing skills, which have greatly improved as part of writing the PhD thesis, also due to my advisor greatly helping out with that.
Okay. And to add to the range of institutions, I can throw in my postdoc time, where I was at INRIA in Paris. I spent time at INESC in Lisbon. I've also spent time in Germany and Denmark. This is not unusual. Across the four of us, we've worked in something like 8 different European countries and the USA. That's fairly standard, I think, for any group of Googlers of this sort of level across engineering. Let's talk a little bit more about sorts of careers that it's possible outside of Google Research, which is a very small part of Google engineering. Ulf, you've already mentioned a little bit about writing skills and so on. Do you want to say any more about the way your PhD has led into your career and what you've done with it since? Well,
so I turned out to be a software engineer, even though I did hardware in my PhD thesis. I really like software, and I like programming, and that turned out to be the right choice for me. But I guess it's different for everyone out there. Yeah. I'm a tech lead, so I'm actually using my writing skills to write design docs that either I or my team then implements afterwards, after discussing and deciding on the way to go. So that's very important. I'm also thinking about going into management, and that's something that you can do here as well, if you want to.
I think that's one of the important things is if you want to. Google's an interesting company from that point of view, because you can continue as an individual contributor all the way to the very, very highest levels of the company without ever having to manage anybody. My role is rather different, since I do manage people almost full-time across search, but even when I look at my team, there's about 35 engineers in that team, a large fraction of whom have PhDs. The one thing that's common across all of them, because they come from very different backgrounds, is this desire to make things, to actually build something that will impact the world. And for anyone who's doing a PhD but who's got a practical focus with that, who wants to make a difference, it makes for an interesting environment. I just came from a session at another event where one of my colleagues was talking about his work in machine learning. He helped build he designed the priority inbox and built most of it. And his work is impacting hundreds of millions of people every day, in that it organizes their email for them, helps them decide which messages to read first, and so on. It's hard to get more impactful than that as a machine learning specialist, for example. But let's go back to something that Dario mentioned. Dario was talking about how his research methodology sort of influences working day. Mary, do you want to add anything to that? How do you use your research skills?
Well, so from a natural language processing perspective, when I worked in research, there were very standard ways for measuring the performance of your systems, if it was a parser or an MT system or whatever it might be. And I'm using exactly the same evaluation methodologies now. So the basic principle of collecting a good sample of the type of data you're trying to process and determining good or either the correct answer or good answers that you would expect from your system, and then sort of challenging your system to replicate those human judgments and measuring how close you get. So that standard technique is still one that I'm going to be using every day. Something else that's from the research methodology perspective. So one of the things that I worked on when I was working in machine translation was looking at linguistically annotating corpora and understanding the differences between different languages and why an MT system would do better on some language pairs than others. And this concept is also directly relevant now, where I work on multilingual text classification systems, and where for some languages we find things to be relatively easy, and for other languages things are pretty tough. So understanding why we might find some languages more difficult to work with than others, and how we might overcome that, what kind of information we might want to use to compensate. So those are the kind of things that really just came with me and transferred with me from academia.
And Dario, does that ring bells? I mean, there's something to add to your earlier comments?
Yeah, actually, I have an example about something we are working on right now. So we have to face a problem at big scales. We have some processes that have to process a large amount of ads data. We want to understand how, like, single entities in which ads, let's say an advertiser, one advertiser, has an impact in our processing time of memory. So how much of the memory, for example, is occupied due to a particular advertiser. So doing this kind of profiling is a kind of a challenging task. And to come up with the best solution, the research methodologies will help me a lot, because I know that I have to look at the state of the art first. So having to look if someone has done something similar in the past. So I then have to model the problem properly before proposing some solutions. So really understanding what I'm going to solve. And what are the possible ways. There are many ways: offline data analysis, online data analysis, modifying the process, attaching internal and external program, many possible solutions. And you can really judge in 10 minutes which is best. You need to analyze each solution and understand what are the pros and cons of each solution, and possibly also try to experiment some prototype of those to understand what is best to implement, what is foreseen to give the best result, or the most maintainable result. And finally, a decision comes out of it, and then you start writing what is your final solution, and you're writing what it's like some code which goes actually live in production. This is also very exciting, because you really see how your solution then is applied to a very large scale. It's really rewarding to see.
And in case anyone's joined us partway through, this is a Google Plus Hangout on air about PhD opportunities at Google in Europe. My name's Peter, and joining me here are Mary, Dario, and Ulf from different Google offices across Europe. Picking up on that last point that Dario made, that leads us nicely onto the topic of algorithms and mathematics. And Ulf, I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about how much you make use of algorithmic material, mathematical background, and so on in your daily work.
So it's difficult to say that, because we're not, when we talk about these things, we don't say, okay, now we're going to talk about algorithms, and now we're going to talk about other things. And what I find is that, especially if you look at complexity theory, that really pervades the language that we use to speak about the system and speak about performance and how we want to evolve the system. And I mean, that happens every day. We use that every day, and we just assume that you're, the person that you're talking to knows that stuff well enough so that they can participate in the discussion. For another example, which is maybe more concrete, is that the build system, as I said before, distributes stuff across a lot of machines in the data center, and we're actually looking into pretty heavy graph theory algorithms that that can help us optimize optimize the distribution so that we get perfect performance, or as good as possible. In some cases, it turns out that these problems are actually hard, and the best thing that we can do is to use a heuristic, and then we can try to tweak the heuristic and figure out, try to figure out what the best way is to do that.
Yeah, I think you made an interesting point at the start there, that you don't turn on and off the use of your background knowledge in computing science, your deep knowledge from your PhD and so on. It's just part of who we all are. We just use it instinctively every day in conversations with our colleagues, in front of whiteboards as we're working and so on. And that environment in which that's the way things are, where there's something like getting on to 15,000 engineers at the moment in 2012 within Google, of whom many thousands have PhDs, but it just sets an environment in which we just talk with people assuming they know things, because they do. It's just part of the everyday discourse. That does lead on to a question of why we're not all doing research. Why is each of us not an active researcher these days in academia? For me, the answer is very simple. I spent a long time as an academic, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time. I was happy to keep going doing that. And it was all about making a difference. But here I can make a difference on a much larger scale. I'm not making a difference on a day-to-day basis, bringing on the next generation of students. Instead, my work, directly or indirectly, is making a difference to tens, hundreds of millions of people across the world. But Mary, why is it that you're not still in academia?
Well, I think something you mentioned earlier, so I'm definitely a very practical person, and I like to sort of get in and fix things, and in my case, rummage around in my data and see what's not working and why it's not working. And, having a system that makes some errors, as most natural language processing systems do, it's no longer an academic question of, oh, we have this type of error and wouldn't it be nice if we could fix it? I have users and systems who are waiting for good classification or better classification, and these kind of mistakes matter to them. So I really need to be able to go in and sort of fix them and solve the problem. So I find it very motivating to have my work sort of deployed in systems and deployed in different products, and really, it matters whether it works well or whether it doesn't. So I think for me that's a really big motivating factor. And even coming back, and so previously I talked about evaluation methodologies and metrics, using the ones that I used in academia, but now sort of dividing up the errors much differently, precision errors, some of them you can live with and some of them you can't, depending on how your system is going to be used and what the person at the other end of it really needs. And this just provides a whole new dimension, really, to the kind of work that I'm doing. So something else is that I spend quite a lot of time sitting in the gap between how good we can get with fully automatic classification techniques and building the best possible systems that we can, and the accuracy level that's needed for the system to be useful. And sometimes there's a gap in there between how good we can get with purely statistical techniques and what we really need for the end use case. And that's sort of an area of work or a gap that doesn't really exist in academia, because you don't really have users. You can't connect with the end system to see which errors matter and which errors don't. So I think it's the practical application that's really a big thing for me.
And your user base is somewhat different, because it's focused very much on the Google engineering population and supporting them in their work. What's the difference for you? Why aren't you still in an academic role?
Well, I guess the answer is similar. I did some soul searching during my PhD and decided I want to be more of a programmer and less of a researcher, and if possible write fewer papers. But obviously the writing skills are even of use if I don't actually have to write papers.
Okay, and that then brings up another nice question, which I'm going to send to Dario in a second, which we're often asked in engineering, because we're all in Google engineering rather than Google research. Can we actually publish papers? Can we collaborate with people externally? Dario, what's your take on that?
So yes, many researchers will know that Google publishes papers. Actually, the research at Google page has an extensive listing divided by category of papers brought to Google. What is different between probably these papers and what is in academia is that these papers are outcome of actual work at Google. So think about the big table paper, which has been very seminal for the distributed, the really distributed like distributed table systems. Very recently, there is also a very interesting one, infrastructure, which is about F1, which is a distributed relational databases. It's also published from Google. I'm also, with the privacy team I'm cooperating with, I'm also discussing some preliminary ideas to write a paper about privacy. So the only difference is that you don't do just research for finding new things, but you present the results that you encountered for something that was needed at Google as a product. There are many examples that you can that you can check yourself on the website. Regarding the external collaboration, I still serve in some program committees, and also I've been contacted as reviewer for papers, and I still accept this thing. It is something very welcome at Google. Recently, I participated in Google sponsorship for WWW 2012 conference. So there is definitely room for cooperation and communication with other people in academia, other researchers.
Right, and if people are interested in seeing what we have in the way of external research and published papers, google.com/research is a wonderful resource for that. It lists a lot of papers published by Googlers, and it also gives people an idea of the sorts of collaborations we're involved in. Now, we don't have very long left, so I'm going to take some questions from the moderator that was set up for this session as well. And the first of those is asking about internships for PhDs. It's a question from Nicholas. And if there are internships for PhDs, is it possible for people to work on their PhD research during them? I'll answer that. I'm a great believer in PhD students taking internships. I strongly encouraged it when I was running a graduate school. Yes, a significant fraction of our summer interns do indeed have PhDs. In addition to the Google Engineering PhDs, studentships, which is the large portion of our intern program, we do have a smaller number of internships with Google Research as well. People working in engineering won't normally work on their research. They will join a real engineering team, and they will be involved in delivering real engineering products. They will write code that goes into the Google code base and that is used to help tens or hundreds of millions of people get things done each day. In my own teams, we used to have a slightly naughty habit of giving the interns the most important task to do because they wouldn't know how scary it was. And then other people would help them if they got stuck. And we had some huge successes like that. And a lot of interns get a great deal out of that. If you're in the middle of your PhD, it's a good thing to do, but treat it as a break from the PhD. Don't treat it as part of your PhD. And it is very difficult to work on an internship as something that's going to contribute to your PhD because you're working in a commercial environment. You're building real products here, and so it may be commercially sensitive, and it would be difficult if that turned out not to be something that could be published or reported back to your supervisor because it turned out to be an important trade secret for it. There's also a related question I'll deal with now from Andre, who asks how long a PhD internship lasts and what stage of the PhD it should be done. Our internships are fairly flexible. They're usually somewhere between 3 and 6 months. You'd need to talk to your supervisor about this. It would depend on how well your PhD is going. My advice before I joined Google was for PhD students to always aim for a 3-month internship. It's just long enough to do something worthwhile, but it's not so long that you'll forget what was going on in your PhD when you get back to it. Certainly 6 months is an upper limit, otherwise there's a risk of detaching from your research agenda before you came away. As for what stage, don't do it a month before writing up your PhD. Get the PhD finished first. Don't do it a month into your PhD because you're not settled in yet. Somewhere in the middle makes a lot of sense. There is absolutely no harm also in doing more than one internship. One of my own PhD students managed an internship with IBM before he actually joined the PhD program, then went on to work with other companies as well. He had internships with Intel and Microsoft and Google, and then he moved on after his PhD. He now works for us in our London office. And then the third question I'm going to get Dario to answer, which is from Lawrence. What sorts of qualities and skills are we looking for in PhD recruits into engineering?
As Mary and Ulf noted that we are looking for people that like to do practical things, and as part of this, actually, there is a very good chance it's not that that you will have to write some code, and we have very high standards here, to be honest. So having also some programming skills, and so probably focusing a little bit on algorithms, so that you can be very proficient with writing or putting in code what your solutions are. I think this is a kind of requirement which, depending on the PhD topic, not everyone might have, and probably you need to work on that a little bit. And besides that, problem-solving skills are very important. But as we mentioned, usually the PhD education should help you with improving those skills.
Okay, and we're getting close to the end now, so we should wrap up this hangout on air about PhD opportunities at Google. 30 seconds each, guys. Any last messages, a top tip for someone who's in the middle of a PhD and thinking about whether they want to move to industrial engineering afterwards? Mary, do you have anything you'd like to sort of finish off with?
I think it's just back to the idea of, if you really love to be practical and get your hands dirty and dig into the problems and see your work deployed in a real world scenario, then you would be suited to it. It would be great.
Okay. Dario?
Yeah, I can talk for Google because I work here. I was generally surprised about the opportunities that were available to me when I was here. Things like being able to go to conferences, or still dedicating some time to some research aspect and things like that. So definitely the PhD is valued here. This is also a very rewarding thing. So yeah, probably if you don't feel like doing research for the rest of your life, you want to do more things that have an impact on actual products. So yeah, Google is definitely your place. Probably not only Google, in general, industrial engineer can let's say take advantage of skills.
Last thoughts from Munich?
Let me just say that if you're a PhD student and you're in the midst of it, and maybe you're getting a bit frustrated, hang in there. You can do it.
Yeah, that's a really good final message. And for those of you who like making things as well as thinking about things, that combination is an amazingly great feeling at the end of every day. And don't feel like you're stuck with only one way forwards or no ways forwards. You have lots of possibilities ahead of you, and engineering in the real world is definitely a place to use your PhD. Okay. Thank you for listening. This was a Google Hangout on Air on PhD opportunities for Google Student Blog on Google+.